Hey gang, coming to you from the auditorium. So I'm back at work, sort of. Things are kind of opening up back here, but we're everything's slow going. So right now the plan is they're cleaning the auditorium up. But I wanted to take a minute and get right into it and just answer some of your questions because you guys had some really like I'm genuinely impressed. This worked out really much better than I thought it would. With having you guys watch the video and ask these questions. Your questions are great. So I'm gonna try and not make this um, like an hour-long video because that would be ridiculous. But and I'm sure you've noticed like some of the replies I've sent back have been kind of an essay, depending on how interesting your questions are. But they're like really good. They're really good. So I'm just gonna kind of go through. I'll read some of the questions. I'll say who it is, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about it because it's really good. Brandon asked, "What would you say is the most effective budget dynamic mic and condenser mic?" And the answer to that question would be, if you look online, you're going to find a bunch of USB microphones that are really popular right now. The one that comes to mind that I know a lot of people use is Blue Icicle. Um, and these microphones, they're just like any other mic. They're usually a condenser mic, from what I understand, but internal to the device is a preamp and an analog to digital converter. So all you have to do with this microphone is plug the USB cable into your computer and you're good to go. You don't need a mixer, you don't need any other gear, you just need the mic, a computer, and then you can download Audacity or some other audio recording thing. So that's probably the most budget, like friendly, easy to go mic. If you guys are interested in recording stuff, it's good for anything really. It's a good way to get started. If you wanted to go higher end, you could buy some other gear, but that would be a good one. You'd need, if you did like a regular mic, you'd need an interface of some type and a mixer or whatever. Brendan also asked what the first modern mic was. The first modern recordings were actually done, at least commercially viable, would be through wax cylinders. So think like a record, old vinyl records that had the needle and the grooves that make the vibrations and the sound. That would be the same concept, except it's a cylinder. I don't have this. I've got this. This has screws in it, so I don't want to tip it over. But the cylinder would be made of wax, and the needle would go, the cylinder would rotate, and the needle goes around it, and there'd be grooves in the wax that would be the vibrations, and then the vibrations are amplified through a horn, not through any electronic means. Everything's 100% mechanical. So that would be the first example of recording. There's some other things, if you look into it a little bit deeper, you can see that you're not going to have electrical recording until electricity, obviously. And then they started figuring out, like, hey, if you move a magnet near this coil, sparks come out, and then you can turn that into noise. So that's essentially what happened there. All right, let's jump to Emily's question. Pull that up. So Emily asked, does each instrument get its own mic? Ideally, yes. If you're recording and you have the money and have the equipment, then yeah, mic everything you can, because that sometimes helps. There are situations where less is more. My favorite example of this is if you watch any bluegrass music. Bluegrass bands love to play around like a side address. They usually are like large diaphragm condenser mics, so they're big. They have like the circle. You can kind of see they're the flat ones. And she asked, why isn't there a mic that picks up in a full circle? And I mean, I don't have any mics here. I'm at work. The omnidirectional mic does pick up in a sphere, but I think she meant like a circle. So if this is your microphone, why doesn't it pick up in a circle? And I don't know of any that do, but I do know that there's a couple called figure eights. So it picks up from one side and then it picks up from the other side. So if you're looking at it from the side, it would be two lobes on either side of it. That's a figure eight. Let's see, Haley. I'll bounce to her and see what she asked. Why, after you stopped playing, was it quiet for like 15 seconds when I was talking? So I put a compressor on the whole audio recording. I record the audio separate from the video because I'm talking to you on my phone right now, and you may notice that the mic is picking up kind of awful. And we can do maybe a little experiment with this. If I clap, now I'm talking. You may have heard it drop down a little bit. What's going on there is a compressor. So the compressor detects when the input signal gets to a certain point, and it like rolls that off. It brings it back down to within a certain range. The idea there is that, the trombone playing was way up here, me talking is way down here. The compressor kind of brings that down so that these are a little bit closer together. The problem comes is that when the volume level's here, and then all of a sudden you're talking's here, but it still keeps the volume low until it releases the compressor, and then it gets back to normal. So you can adjust the parameters on that to make it so that the release time, as they call it, would be less, so it would bounce back quicker. But that tends to sound weird on recordings, because then it just sounds like somebody's sitting there and turning the volume up and down, which is not always cool. The reason the mics pick up so well because you're in a small room, so it's echoing. Yeah, that's a big reason. Isolation is key with microphones. That's why dynamics are good for close miking, because they tend to have a little bit more isolation. If you have a dynamic in your face, it's picking up a field that's not much bigger than your head. So your body is actually blocking all the other noise that's around you with that. All right, Hannah said she's been playing Fortnite a lot over quarantine. I've been playing Metal Gear Solid 5. I don't like online games. What kind of mic would be most similar to the kind of mic that's on my headset? A condenser mic. I'm talking to you in a condenser mic. Most of the time, your small microphones are going to be condenser. They're easy to make in a small form factor. There's not as many moving parts and things like that. Like the dynamic mics have like a little bit of a coil that moves around. You can make a small dynamic, but it's easier to make a small condenser for whatever reason. So yeah, those are usually condensers. The concerts I've been to, seeing artists singing always has like a standard microphone like we'd give to a speaker in meeting, usually like a dynamic. A lot of times it's the band. The singers want to look over their bandmates while singing and talk. Why don't they just use omnis so they can sing in whatever direction it's in? So that comes back to the previous question. So she's asking, why wouldn't a music group, if they're interacting with each other and playing, why wouldn't they use an omnidirectional mic? Well, an omni, keep in mind, is going to pick up everything. So if I'm singing into it here, it's picking up me from right here, but it's also picking up behind me and on my side and above me. And if you've ever been to a concert, you know that it's really loud. The PA is part of that, but there's also stage volume. So you have somebody banging away on drums. That's acoustical noise that's coming from the drum set, in addition to whatever's being reproduced over the PA system. So an Omni in that situation would be difficult to get isolation. It would be harder to mix with that mic because it would pick up so much other sound sources on the stage. You can do, like, I've seen a lot of performers do the over-the-ear. I think of like Britney Spears and Garth Brooks made those really popular when they were in their heyday. Those sometimes are omnis, because when you have it here, you can't always guarantee that it's going to be pointing this way. So like if the mic picks up directionally to your voice here, but then the singer bumps it, so now it's picking up over here, then there's nothing you can do as a sound engineer. So it makes sense sometimes to have those be non-directional, have them be omni mics. So good question there. Ian says the AT804 came from the library. It did. I don't remember if Miss Albert or Miss Buchanan brought it down here. So why did you just use a trombone in the video? It seemed I just wanted to have something consistent to show you between mics, so you could hear, you knew what it was going to sound like, so you could better hear the differences between the mics. What's the best mic for long range? Okay, so if you've ever seen a football game on TV or been to a football game, on the sideline you'll see these guys that are holding, like, they look like big bowls. These are directional parabolic microphones. So there's a mic in the middle of that, and then there's the big bowl that kind of focuses the sound. If you've ever been to like the Orlando Science Center or any of those science places, there's usually a display where there's a big hemisphere that you can sit in, and then like 100 yards across the room there'll be another one, the same thing, and they're pointed at each other, but you can hear the person that's sitting all the way across this big noisy room because the sound waves are focused through those spheres. So the sound bounces in, the parabola bounces it towards the middle, because of the angles involved with the parabola. Those are probably the best for long distance, because they use them in football because they can point them at the line of scrimmage, and you can hear quarterback calling audibles, and you can hear them crunching together as they're tackling and all that. So that would be a good example. The other one I'd come up with, would be a shotgun microphone. I don't have any. But essentially, if you look up the polar pattern, if you Google shotgun polar pattern microphone, you'll see that it looks like a balloon animal shotgun. And that mic picks up a very narrow field in front of it, and it has two lobes on the side and one lobe on the back that pick up a lot less. But usually you see them in video production. So on the top of a video camera, sometimes you'll see something that looks fluffy. They call it a dead cat. That's a big windscreen that goes on the end of a shotgun microphone. So good question, Ian. We got Jenna. Have to open the documents sometimes. Okay, Jenna asked, how did you learn to use microphones? And my answer was trial and error. I started doing this when I was like 11, I think. I don't know. It was long. It was a long time ago. I was very young. But trial and error. You try one mic. If it sounds good, it's like, oh, okay, cool. I'll do that again. If another mic, it didn't work. One of my favorite things that I found is I like to shove a 57 in the piano to mic it, and I set it directly on the soundboard. And that gets really good isolation from the drum set for jazz band. It's one of my favorite ways to mic it. It also prevents, the band kids from knocking over a boom stand and stuff like that. It's just easier for our environment, being that it's high school. She also asked, what's the difference between directional and other type of microphones? So directional I would imply like a cardioid mic, but there's many flavors of cardioid. There's super cardioid, there's hyper cardioid. I think there's like ultra cardioid. You also, any mic is technically directional because you're picking up from a certain direction. But I think she's saying like, what's the difference between the directional and the omni? Because that's what we had in the video there. The omnidirectional microphones pick up from all around. So if I'm holding, here's the pencil mic. If I'm holding the microphone here and talking into it, even if I come over here, it should pick up about the same from the top, even from the back, which we discovered with that mic in the video. When I turned it around and played into it, it essentially sounded the same. Some of the higher level frequencies didn't get picked up because if you looked at the polar pattern, from the back, it didn't pick up, I think, over 2,000 hertz. So your frequency, remember human hearing starts down here at like 20 hertz, you can feel, on up to like 80 that you can hear. And then at the very top end, you guys are probably still rocking up to 20,000 cycles, 20,000 hertz, which is that really high pitch sound. But as you get older, that goes down to like 16, sometimes even lower than that, depending on how bad your ears get wrecked. But that microphone picks up from like whatever the bottom was, like 80 hertz, up to I think it was 2,000 hertz from all around. But anything above 2,000 hertz, then it starts to move to only towards the front, and that's just the way they're built. Every microphone will be different in terms of the polar pattern, but you can look that up and see which frequencies work best on that. So the difference between directional and other type is just the how you orient it to pick up what you want to pick up. Some mics pick up from the front like that, some mics pick up from the side, some mics pick up from one side. It just depends. Depends on what the manufacturer did. All right, Jesse asked, are the actual components inside a condenser mic more fragile, or is it just a matter of the casing on dynamic versus condenser? So, in reality, we always say condensers are fragile, dynamics are not. And the truth in that is it's not always true. I've dropped dynamics and had them break on the first time. That happens sometimes. Generally speaking, a dynamic microphone has less that can be broken in it, just because it's essentially a coil of wire attached to a diaphragm. So imagine the pencil's the coil. Here's your diaphragm. Diaphragm vibrates when you talk into it, and that moves the coil. When the coil moves next to the magnet, which will be the tape measure, that creates an electric field. So the coil's vibrating with however the sound goes. That makes an electric field form, and that is what makes the signal from the mic. It's a very small electric field. You would have a hard time measuring it with a test meter, but it is there. But there's not a lot that can break in that. It's usually easier to make those very robust. With a condenser mic, you've got the diaphragm, but then you've also got another plate next to it, and they don't touch. They're very far apart. And between these plates, you can actually store an electric charge. So think like static electricity. If you rub your feet on the carpet, you can build up a charge and then zap somebody with it. That's the same idea here. So that's a capacitor. That's effectively almost like a battery. As that's charged, that maintains an electric field, and you charge it from the board. So the condenser mic actually gets its power from the board. That's phantom power, 48 volts, if you've ever seen that. So this field is charged. So as this top one vibrates, that's what's going to change the electric field, because the distance between the plates will affect the signal coming out of that microphone. Now, these are very thin plates. These are very precision engineered. So when you bump it, if one side of it's now touching, then it creates a short. It's really easy to knock out the orientation. Even if you change the distance, it's going to affect how the mic picks up. So that's why condensers typically are more fragile. But a lot comes on the casing. It's the construction of the mic. You can make a really robust condenser mic. You have one in your phone. How many times have you dropped your phone and that mic still works? So it's just a matter. There's a lot of factors that go into it. There are fragile dynamics. There are robust condensers. And he asks, how much does the mic boosting affect the overall quality of the mic? Say if you boost it up 10 dB, will that lower the quality of the mic or just increase volume? And that depends on your overhead. So if you increase the gain, the top knob on the mixer, eventually, if you're not reaching feedback, which is where it cycles through the PA, you'll hit a point where it starts to clip. And what clipping is if you imagine the waveform, so, I don't have my whiteboard, but if you say this is the audio waveform, can you see that? And these are the peaks. What happens is as you turn the gain up, you're essentially just increasing the amplitude there. So the peaks are getting taller, but at some point you're going to hit a line where the circuitry can't increase it past that point. So it just clips off the top of that wave, and we perceive that as a distorted sound, and that's called clipping. So if you boost it up to that level, then yeah, you'll clip out the signal. Best case scenario, it just sounds bad. Worst case, you can damage equipment if you overdrive it and clip it too much. All right, let's do Josiah. I didn't realize how different dynamic and condensers were in picking up sound. I knew that you needed past dynamic mics. The difference condenser mic picks up. He's doing a little reply response. Here's Lael's. I think she asked a question. What exactly makes a dynamic mic more durable than a condenser? I think we talked about that with Jesse. Also, why would a course prefer SM81 if it tends to pick up more background noise? Does it help or something? So yeah, this is interesting. Imagine, so we know what a cone looks like. If you look, this pencil's destroying this paper. I don't know why that's happening. So if you look at a cone, right? I screwed that up. I went through the paper. And let's say this is your mic here. So we'll draw the little microphone, right? If you're close to it right here, the distance between point to point is much less than if you were at a further distance away and it picks up here. So right here, you may only be able to pick up one person, but if you go over here, you can fit a lot more people in that field, right? So the further away you get, the wider the pickup is going to be. Now the difference between dynamics and condensers is condensers are much more sensitive, meaning that as you get further away from them, they'll still pick up quite a bit. Whereas a dynamic, the further you get away, it gets really quiet really quick. So that's why condensers typically are better for miking your choir, your big groups, and they do pick up background noise. So isolation is important. So when I'm aiming a condenser, I'm making sure I'm hitting in an area where basically I'm pointing them at heads, because I want to pick up what's coming out of their mouths and not their foot on the riser or the lights buzzing or whatever else you can get in there. All right, we got Maddie. She's doing the 2 questions. Okay, I recently watched an animated show that was shot like a podcast. All the audio was very dry. It sounded as if they were sitting down in a studio, compared to other animated shows where the sound has more of the room in it. Would they have used a different mic to accomplish the podcast and the sound for regular animation? And what I haven't seen the show, so I don't know. But what I'm assuming is they may have recorded as a group as opposed to individually. If you've ever watched voiceover artists work, they usually do it by themselves. Usually it's one person standing in front of a windscreen of some type. Usually it's like those big discs that kind of just go between them, and a microphone. And they just sit there and read lines, and they're by themselves. They're not reading with other actors. That's not always the case. Sometimes they'll have different people in studios, but usually they isolate per voice. Like one character gets isolated in a room, and then if they have another one, they're using headphones to kind of communicate between the two if they're reading scenes together. What it sounds like here is they probably recorded it as like a table read, so they're all sitting together. They may have had one or two mics, or maybe they had individual mics. But if you have a bunch in a room, they're all going to pick up a little bit of the room sound unless you isolate in some way. So that's probably what was going on. And most podcasts are recorded like that. If you've ever seen radio shows when they record in podcasts, usually they're all sitting around a table. They may have their own mic, but that mic is also going to pick up everything else in the room. Even though you're pointing it directly at a person, there's still going to be some extra room sound that comes in. She said, for band, I had to record myself playing for assignments. It was really hard to get my phone to pick up the dynamic contrast on the recording. Is this because of the room I was playing in or the phone mic? Mostly because of the phone mic, and we talked about that with the compressor. So your phone has a compressor on it, and some are better than others. So what it's trying to do is trying to normalize the highs and the lows and get it within this range, so that when you play it back somewhere, you can actually hear all of it. You can hear the loud and the quiet parts, and that's good sometimes for very dynamic music. It's not good. It's bad. All right, let me move this over. We got Nicole. I think we got two more. Nicole and Sammy. These are great questions, guys. I was like so stoked. You have no idea. Highlight of the quarantine. What mic, asks Nicole, captures the most room noise? So that would probably be an Omni, because it's going to pick up everything, and some kind of condenser, because they're more sensitive than dynamics typically. But again, it depends. If it's a quiet room, condenser. If it's a really loud room, you may want to throw a dynamic in there. What mic captures noise from the top and not around? So any mic that's going to be like a cardioid is going to pick up from the top. Like, I don't. What is the top of a mic? It's hard to say. I wish I had a mic. Is this a mic? I do have a mic. This is a really crappy mic. It's a little Radio Shack mic. It is a unidirectional dynamic microphone, which is probably a cardioid of some kind. But yeah, if you've ever... Oh, that fell off. This is supposed to be glued on there. But actually, you can see like the little diaphragm. That little metal thing on the top is the diaphragm, and then it's attached inside, and there's probably magnets on there somewhere that moves around. This thing came off, the glue. But yeah, anyway, so I'm assuming when you say top of the microphone, like this is top, but this could also be top because there's a switch, which is nice. So I don't know. This one picks up from this end. So whatever I'm pointing this end at is going to be what's picked up the most. There's other mics, like we talked about, the side address mics that are usually flatter and they pick up from the side. So it depends. If you don't know, Google the mic manufacturer name and number, and they usually have some sort of paper that'll describe what you're doing. All right, let me move this. We got Sammy. My 2 quiz questions. How do we know what type of mic is most ideal for a certain situation? Trial and error. Experiment. You'll find quickly what doesn't work when it sounds bad or you get feedback. As a general rule, you don't want to put any mic in a place where it's going to pick up from the speaker you're projecting through in live sound. But beyond that, it's just trial and error. Sometimes I find a new way to use a microphone that I didn't know about that works really well, and other times I use it and I'm like, wow, that sounded really crappy. I'm never doing that again. The other way to do it is to look at the manufacturer. The manufacturer recommends it, what they want their mics to be used for. The interesting thing is the SM58, which is arguably one of the most popular microphones in the world for live sound, particularly live vocals, was originally designed as a studio mic. Shure built it. It's an SM, which stands for studio microphone. They wanted people to use this inside of a recording studio. And for whatever reason, people said, hey, this is really good for live sound. They like it. They like the sound. It's relatively cheap. You can get them for $100, which for a microphone's not bad. And they're very durable. They can survive in touring environments and road conditions, which means being thrown in and out of a case, dropped on a stage, all kinds of stuff. So mics can be used for whatever they can be used for, and if you find one that works for your situation and you like it and you get good response from it, use it. It's just trial and error. Why is it important to know how each mic works in the situations they work in? So that's important just so you can do effective trial and error. So if you don't know what a condenser is and how it works and you're using it to close mic somebody that's singing really loudly, you can damage that microphone because certain microphones will have limits on how much what they call SPL, which is sound pressure level, they can absorb. Dynamic microphones, as a general rule, will typically take more abuse in that regard than condensers. But if you pump, if you park a condenser mic in front of a guitar amp, there's a lot of condenser mics that would be destroyed by that. Similarly, if you put it in front of a brass player, trombones, trumpets, that kind of thing, bell front brass give out really high dB levels at the source. So if you put your ear in a bell, there's a good chance you're going to be hitting 95, maybe even over 110 dB, depending on how loud that guy's blowing. So that's an important reason alone to learn how not to destroy your gear while you're doing the trial and error, because you can break microphones if you use them incorrectly, even if you don't abuse them by dropping them on the ground. So, but that is that. This video is already way too long, so I apologize for that. But like I said, y'all's questions were outstanding. We're gonna do that again because I feel like you dug it, like you got into it, which is really neat. And I love being able to respond to stuff that you're interested in because I feel like then you're going to learn more from it and get more out of it. So, hope everyone's well. Hope microphone quarantine is good. And we're going to do another activity this week. Got one more assignment this week. I just got to finish the video on it. But like I said, I'm at work doing stuff. So, I want to do this real quick. And we'll catch you cats later.